Hello and welcome to not another episode of the Mindset RX series of the Alpha Movement podcast. My name is Tom Foxley. I work with functional athletes and build them the champ's mindset. These podcasts usually highlight the methods I teach the athletes I work with and allow you to pick up the scalable, learnable mindset lessons from the best in functional fitness. Today though is a touch different. My guest and I aren't focusing on mindset, but the injury side of functional fitness. Friend of the show, Dr. Andy Galpin, who, by the way, is doing phenomenal things right now, introduced me to the guest on today's show, Dr. Richard Arm. I'm not going to spoil Richard's intro as to what he is, what he does, and who he is, but he has worked with some truly great athletes. A couple of pieces of housekeeping. Firstly, September's intake of the Inner Athlete Performance Camp is now closed. I'm possibly going to do one more this year. Thank you to everyone who signed up. It's going to be awesome. If you're interested in the next intake, which will probably start in around 4 to 6 weeks time if it happens, head on over to mindsetrx.squarespace.com/IAPC, and that's the last I'm going to say about that for a while. Secondly, head on over to the Facebook page for the Alpha Movement. If you search for Facebook, or you go to facebook.com/Alpha Movement Official, you're going to find a post, if you scroll down a little bit, for a brand new course that I've released entirely free. And the whole point is to discover what's holding you back from pushing as hard as you know you can. It's called Intensity Tolerance 101, and it's a testing phase which I've used with all my athletes until this point. Now I've realized it's so powerful that I want to release it for free. Anyway, I'm now going to pass on over to Richard Arm.
My name is Richard Alm. I'm a chiropractic physician in Columbus, Ohio, so I have a practice there. We got a team of 3 docs that are in here. It's kind of a nice little blend of medical care with functional training and manual therapy and all that kind of stuff. But I got into it by way of really being an athlete and a strength coach. So I started there, was lucky enough to train with multiple Olympians, attempting but unsuccessfully to qualify for the Olympics. But it gave me just a really cool opportunity just to meet people and train really hard. So my coach his name was Judd Logan. He's a 4-time Olympian, actually married now Jackie Alm, of course, but Jackie Jessling, she was a multiple-time All-American, multiple-time national champion, made the 2014, and then just a bunch of other multiple-time Olympians in track and field. And that gave me just the incentive and the obsession really with the body and how it works. And so I wanted to go into strength training and performance and got really, really excited about that. And then as I was a strength coach and an athlete, I just kept asking deeper and deeper questions, and eventually found myself in the medical field where I could actually dig into the anatomy and the mechanics, the neurology, just everything about the body to really understand the why behind things, right? Like you might see something in, like when you were coaching this morning, you might have seen somebody squatting and their pelvis shifts to the left at the bottom of the squat. Or you see an athlete that when they catch a snatch, their right shoulder is turned over like this. And you can tell them to correct it, but in a lot of ways they can't. And I wanted to know why. So I kept digging into this and got into the medical field. And now really I get to treat patients and athletes every day. But everything that I see either at a seminar or in a research article or with a patient kind of runs through the filter of a strength coach first. So I now as a speaker, because I also have athlete enhancement, which is kind of how we got involved, I kind of do information arbitrage, which is where you take something from one area and bring it to another that has value. So I try to take things that I see as valuable in the rehab and the medical world that I know as a former strength coach, I know would be super powerful and applicable over in the performance realm. And a lot of times that takes decades to get there. But now I'm trying to just sort of, jump that information straight to the performance coaches all over the world, so that they can get better at training their athletes.
Okay, so you're seeing holes in not only functional fitness, well, that's the worst term ever, but like the functional fitness world or the CrossFit world, if you're going to list legal things, and you see holes there, and in traditional strength conditioning, and then you apply a more medical filter to it.
I wouldn't even say it's a medical filter. So I do medical care, but really what I do is I improve function. I improve performance. And if somebody has, let's say, 2 disc herniations, whether they're 22 years old or they're 80, you still want to improve the way that they move and stabilize. So it's not a medical slant. It's that we learn things in the medical realm that are 100% applicable to the performance realm, but a lot of times that information gets lost or never really trickles down to the performance area. And so my job, or what I love doing, is thinking about what I'm seeing in the medical world as a strength coach, say like, man, how they load that, how I'm training the foot to fix a meniscus tear, or well, to improve the function of a meniscus tear, or how I'm training that shoulder blade to stabilize. No one's talking about this over in the Olympic weightlifting world. So I need to now take this information, because here's what I'm trying to do. Here's the standard that I'm trying to get that shoulder to move like. Why aren't we training this over in CrossFit, in Olympic weightlifting, right? Why aren't we talking about proper foot loading in the squat as opposed to just load the heel and sit back on the hamstrings?
So why do you think that, is it a case of coaches shying away from the technicality of the knowledge, or is it just the fact that knowledge hasn't been transferred before? I
think it's both. I think sometimes, coaches want to just, put people through a good workout. Well, think about CrossFit, for instance. Like, I know you work with a lot of CrossFitters. CrossFit gets shit on a lot of times because, you see all these bad videos of someone doing something stupid. But a lot of times, or the thing that makes CrossFit successful, one of them, is that people get what they want. They want to go in, they want to work hard, they want to get in good shape. And when you go into CrossFit, you get that. And I think a lot of coaches, they just want to be able to provide that hard workout, pushing hard, feeling like you did everything that you could that day. So there is a part of the population that's not interested necessarily in digging down to the super deep levels, and that's fine. My job is to make it as simple and applicable to them as possible. But then there's also another population that is interested in that, but they haven't found it. It's not that they don't have access to it. It's that no one is really digging down. And going to some obscure seminar for just medical professionals, they can't get there. And so even if it's given to them, they get excited about it. Like I just spoke this past weekend. Do you know what Perform Better is? Mm-hmm. They have these cool kind of strength training, functional training seminars. I just spoke at one 2 days ago in Long Beach, and I went over a lot of the medical stuff, and they were super, super pumped about how do you apply proper stabilizing strategies to Olympic weightlifting, right? And once they get that information, they get excited about it. So there is a percentage of the population that's not really that interested, and then there's a percentage that is very interested. They just don't have it.
And when you look at that, they don't have the knowledge. What are the things that stand out for you?
A lot of it is really how we're supposed to stabilize. I'm sort of on a mission to help everybody understand this better. One of the big things that I'll talk about is our industry's obsession with the posterior chain. So whether you're a CrossFitter, whether you're a strength coach, a power lifter, anybody that does traditional strength training, right, and anybody that does particularly the training sports, they're kind of like stuck in the sagittal plane a little bit. Everything that they do is they want to strengthen the posterior chain. So the erector spinae, the hamstrings, they want to just lock that down so that they can perform better. Now, that works in the short term, but overactivity of the posterior chain in the medical world, I refer to as an extension compression stabilizing strategy, where they're using extension and compression of the lumbar spine to create the spinal stiffness or rigidity necessary to transfer force from the legs into a barbell or a shot put or whatever. So what you're doing when you overemphasize the posterior chain is actually you're just strengthening a compensatory pattern. It's not an ideal pattern. It doesn't serve you well in the end. What it does is it actually just gets you short-term results, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. That's me. Roll on here. Yeah. How often does that happen?
The whole time.
Let me turn this on.
It's almost like your body is a system, and it has to be worked as a system as a whole, isn't it? It's weird.
Yeah, but exactly. But a lot of times, I guess I can just turn this puppy off. A lot of times, I think people are trying to do the right things, right? So, you take some trunk exercise. like a hollow rock, for instance. You know, how do they use hollow rocks?
Yeah.
So a hollow rock is a pretty advanced trunk exercise. If you actually get into what I call a pressurized hollow, which I realize is an oxymoron, but a hollow that the gymnast typically teaches, they're drawing their abdomens in and they're rounding their lumbar spine over. So the position is almost full flexion of the lumbar spine, and you need to have pressure in there that we can talk about later on if you want to train ideal stability. But a lot of times I'll see people doing hollow rocks and they're still using way too much spinal extensors and hip flexors to the point where their back is cramping. Mm-hmm. So think about that. If you're in a position that looks kind of like a hollow position, but your back is spasming, that means that you're using that posterior chain to extend and compress the spine to generate that stability. And it's always because you lack proper activation or sufficient stability from the abs and the diaphragm and the pelvic floor to generate this really strong co-contraction of all those muscles. If you don't have that, you will resort to that extension, compression, stabilizing strategy. And so a hollow rock is a perfect example of someone they might try to be doing it right, and it's all with good intention, but the strategy that they're using to execute that movement, be it a side bridge or a squat or a reverse hyper or whatever you want, is imbalanced between the posterior chain and all the other muscles involved.
Okay. So for someone who doesn't have a coach such as yourself, like they're ready to assist them and to show them the different technique, how do you get that information across?
A lot of I have stuff on the website. I have some articles and videos on athlete-enhancement.com to make that a little bit easier. Really, starting if they want to learn how to break overactivity of their posterior chain, they need to be able to get into an actual pressurized hollow and breathe there. So the easiest way to do it is not in the rings, not, on the dip station or hanging or even on supine. If you get on your knees and elbows and try to learn how to round your back over and then breathe into the back, and then as you breathe out, don't lose the flexed position of the spine. What typically happens is athletes will kind of get there, or they'll round with just their thoracic spine and not their lumbar spine. And they usually do that because they can't physically let the posterior chain go. It's just rigidly tight. So you learn how to breathe into the back there, and then as they breathe out, then they kind of crunch the abs down, bringing them farther and farther into a hollow. Once you learn how to do that, where you can feel the back relaxing as you breathe in, then you're able to actually own that position there, and now you can start challenging it in other things.
Very nice. Very nice.
Also, I need to say, that is an exercise to break overactivity of that posterior chain, but that is not how you're supposed to stabilize with a clean or a deadlift or a squat or anything. A lot of people, I think, they apply the hollow position to that. Or do you guys have PRI over there?
I'm sure we do, but I'm not familiar.
Well, it doesn't bad analogy then, but a lot of times people think, I got to activate my abs, so they try to pull the ribs down, and it ends up rounding their lumbar spine, and now they're loading their spine in flexion, which is a really, really bad idea for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No.
When actually, let's go for this. What other stability issues do you see?
Well, from that, anything can develop. So it's amazing how important the quality of what I'll call central stability is. If you have any dysfunction in how you stabilize your spine and pelvis, that's going to ripple effects all the way to your feet and your hands. There's a guy out of Australia. His name is Paul Hodges, and he's been doing really, really cool research on trunk stability since the 90s. And in 1996, he actually did this article or did this research where he showed he had an EMG in the abdominal wall and then on the deltoid. And he showed, definitively measured it, that when you go to raise your arm, your abdominal wall will fire before the deltoid does. That means that when you think, I need to grab this tea, maybe, I don't know if you drink tea. Yes. If I'm going to grab this coffee, my trunk knows, or my brain knows, that I have to establish stability of my spine first before I can actually create open chain movement to grab something. So if the quality of your trunk stabilizing strategy is not right, then you're going to lose function everywhere. Take, for example, shoulder. Like, so in the snatch, you see a lot of people, they're turned over like this. Now, unfortunately, that might be because they're coached to sort of do this, like push up towards the barbell, which I know intuitively makes sense, but that's not a good pattern. And I mean, we can go into it later if you want, but that kinematically puts the shoulder in a not great position. But in the shoulder, that might be happening. This rounded shoulder position might be happening if you have trunk instability here. You have a muscle on your side of your ribs that goes underneath the shoulder blade and then helps stabilize that, called the serratus anterior. If that serratus anterior doesn't have good stable origin, which is the rib cage, then it's not going to be able to do its job very well, right? So if you don't stabilize the trunk and the rib cage, now the serratus can't do its job. So then the brain defaults to using upper traps and levator scap, which now puts you in this position when you're catching a snatch. So the trunk stability can lead to shoulder problems. The trunk stability can lead to hip stability issues. The trunk stability can lead to foot stability issues. And the other thing is that a lot of times instability to the trunk actually expresses itself in hypomobility, so tight muscles. A lot of times with CrossFit, they're really, really good about stretching and mashing and getting moving. But if you have somebody that, let's say they have limited dorsiflexion because their calves are tight, which is as common as dirt, then they come in and they compression band and they stretch out and they do all this foam rolling and they get it moving, and then it feels great. They're able to just bury their squat, no problem. And then they come back the next day, and what happened? It's all back to where it was, right? Nothing that they did had any permanent effect on their actual resting tension of their calves. So every single day they have a limited ankle dorsiflexion. Well, it's because in many cases they have actual trunk instability, which produces tight back, tight hamstrings, tight calves. So until you fix the actual trunk stability, you're just going to have to keep stretching your calves out every single day, because whenever you challenge your core, squatting, deadlifting, cleaning, whatever you want, it will activate that extension, compression, stabilizing strategy and make the calves tight again.
Nice. That makes so much sense. When we're, I'm sure it depends on the athlete, as all these things do. But if we're looking at the low hanging fruit of trunk stability exercises, what are your go-tos?
Well, the first thing you have to kind of, again, I think one of my struggles is that I care very much about the actual quality. So to take it and then just be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to do that for 20 minutes a day as hard as I can. It really is about quality. So there's a guy out of the Czech Republic named Pavel Kolaj who is explaining movement and function better than anyone I've ever seen. And he has an organization called Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization, so DNS. And I actually get to teach for him. And one of the things that he does is he has an exercise, or he has a lot of exercises that are based around developmental kinesiology. So you basically utilize positions seen in early development, the first, year of life, 15 months of life. And as you go through development, you're acquiring, you're activating certain muscles, acquiring certain postures and motions and positions. So you're learning how to stabilize the trunk. You're learning how to turn on your glutes. You're learning how to stabilize the shoulder, extend the thoracic spine. You develop a lot of these in the first 15 months of life. And at 3 months is when we start to learn how to integrate the diaphragm with the abdominal wall and the pelvic floor to generate trunk stability. So this 3-month position would be you'd lay on your back and you can have your feet on a wall, or you can have your calves on a bench. You have yourself to where your femurs are pointing at the ceiling and your shins are parallel. So triple flexion is what some coaches call it. In that position, you've brought the pelvis and the thoracic diaphragm into a parallel relationship. And now you can start training the ability to contract the diaphragm to get it involved with stabilizing. Because it's not just tighten up. If you suck your belly in or you just crank your back on, you haven't actually pressurized from the inside out. And that inside out idea is the diaphragm, when it contracts, it actually gets pulled towards the pelvis. And that compresses the contents of the abdomen and pressurizes the abdomen. That's going to create this outward pushing force that's going to drive this really powerful co-contraction of all the muscles involved. So instead of just using your six-pack or just using your spinal erectors, you involved the obliques, the pelvic floor, the quadratus lumborum, the transverse abdominis. Everything works together to maintain good positioning of the spine. So the first thing you have to learn how to do is just literally push your belly out to the sides. Most people, if you say tighten up, they're going to suck their belly in, which is a concentric contraction of the abdominal wall. In function, you actually want an eccentric contraction into an isometric hold. So you might just have your hands like this, and you put them on the soft part of your abdomen on either side. So when you can either practice breathing in, but initially you should be able to push into your belly so that it expands out to the sides like this. And you learn what that is actually the diaphragm contracting and pushing the abdomen out. You start there. That's what most people cannot do very well. And then you can work into, you brace like that and you learn to breathe in and out without losing that co-contraction. And then you just start loading it. You can lift your calves up off the bench holding that, and now you got to support the weight of your legs. You can grab a barbell, get into a good brace position there, drop down into a hang clean position, breathe in and out of there. And after that, it's about loading it and applying it to the different complex movements like the squat or the snatch or whatever.
Very nice. I think that's so undertaught by a lot of people. That's a really nice, simple way of explaining it as well. What do you think about a belt to cue that feeling?
So you can use a belt to train the diaphragm. A lot of people, they don't know how to contract the diaphragm. A lot of people don't even really use the diaphragm. You see a lot of athletes where their chest is elevated.
Breathing up here as well.
Yeah, they're breathing up there. So when you do that, you're actually using not only your upper traps, but you actually are using your spinal extensors to extend and lift the rib cage up to get air into the lungs. So in those cases, those athletes, they have to just wake the diaphragm up at all. And a belt is a good way to give the diaphragm some tactile cueing to feel that. What you have to be careful with, though, is that most people, when they put a belt on, they think push into the belt, push their belly into the belt. And that's a pushing forward motion, which usually results in turning your back extensors on to increase the pressure forwards. So what you need to do is think push out to the sides, or without losing your how tall you are, push even into the back. So almost think like the pressure is pushing the spine into the belt. What a lot of athletes do is this. They'll push in and they sort of will pull down and crunch. Yep. And that's just to get pressure back there. You should be able to stay tall, and as you brace, the rib cage will drop, but your spine won't lose positioning. The belt's great for that, right? And I'm not, even though I'm really big into maximizing trunk stability, the belts are still a useful tool there, but they replace the abdominal wall in the stabilizing process. So in a sport like CrossFit or Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting where you can use a belt, you kind of need to know how to use the belt properly. But if you're training an athlete for soccer, for instance, if you're not going to use the belt in your sport, you really only want to use it sparingly. And I would argue you need to ask yourself, is it worth the risk to put this, 60 kilo, female soccer player under a 300-pound barbell to deadlift when she just plays soccer? Like, what are we doing? Why is that necessary? Right?
Makes perfect sense. Something that just came to me is, are there any types of athletes that you don't see on a regular basis? The reason I'm asking is because of just looking at patterns and if there's anything you can do to avoid these kind of dysfunctions.
I mean, I don't see I don't see cricket players. But I see most of the traditional U.S. sports. I tend to, because my background was in track and field. I tend to see a lot of track and field athletes, a lot of triathletes also. And then because I was a strength coach and a competitive Olympic weightlifter, I see a lot of weightlifters, a lot of power lifters, and then, of course, a lot of CrossFitters. So I probably have a lot more experience with training sports, like the ones I just sort of described. What you're doing in training is what you're doing in competition. But I do see tennis players and soccer players and hockey and lacrosse and football and all that kind of good stuff. In general, the athletes in training sports tend to be sort of stuck in the sagittal plane, right? And again, for that reason, it's difficult for coaches to think, all right, well, if I want to get better at the snatch, why would I do a rotary movement and train in another plane? Even though it makes perfect sense if you understand function and movement, I get it. It's a little bit of a step away. Like, well, I can just do an RDL, right? I can just work my posterior chain harder, do some GHD hyperextensions, and then you get kind of an immediate improvement. But there's a ceiling effect to that. So you might, in the beginning, let's say that you have someone that's never lifted before, and they come in and you start just training the shit out of their posterior chain. They will make a faster jump to a better level in that first 3 months, 6 months, 2 years of training. But you're actually training like a pathological strategy there that eventually you'll hit a ceiling effect, and then that'll start to flatten out. Now more posterior chain isn't going to cut the mustard and get them better. So I get why they would stick in the sagittal plane, but those athletes, they need to get much, much stronger in the coronal and the transverse plane, not only to avoid injury, but to be able to handle training better, and then also for performance. Sports like tennis, where you are, single arm in all three planes constantly, you don't see them having the same kind of problem where their posterior chain is just cranked on like you would a CrossFitter or powerlifter, because they're constantly moving in all these three planes in their sport.
Yeah, just from personal experience, the best thing I've done for my athleticism in recent years has been starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just from the rotation, the bracing as well, and knee in your obliques. Like that's a useful cue. That's
every position, right? I mean, you have to be strong in every position and every movement. So that would be the greatest example of a triplanar, multiplanar movement. Whereas, if the moment you grab a barbell, you're locked into the sagittal plane, because no one in the snatch wants to do this, and you can't do this, right? So you end up getting sort of stuck there. So the jiu-jitsu is actually probably a really good way to train that.
Yeah, my back pain's just gone since I've been doing it regularly. Talk to me.
Probably because you actually got that posterior chain to calm down and involved other muscles in the stabilizing process.
Yeah, there's so much of this pulling in, and you have to breathe. You got no choice.
A little bit. Yeah. You can not breathe for about 10 seconds, and then you're just out. That's cool.
So talk to me about torque.
Torque?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So torque is a term that's thrown out a lot that I think means more muscle activity is what I think that they mean. They'll say increasing torque in the hips or increasing torque in the trunk. Torque itself, as defined by engineers, is a force acting around an axis that could create rotation. So you can generate torque without actually creating motion. I talk about that all the time because I have an unhealthy obsession with biomechanics. And so a lot of times I think people throw out things like torque or closed chain or just terms that they sort of hear, whereas I just will dig in and actually look at engineering text. Like, I don't know if you can see over here, like this is literally just a statics book. So this is an engineering book.
Oh,
this
very
is
nice. That's geeky.
That's geeky, right? That's kind of going in and trying to figure out, all right, well, we're saying this in the performance world. All right, well, let's dig in. Okay, well, here's a little bit about this here. And you just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper to understand all the details and intricacies of a term or of a concept. And torque is one that people say a lot that I think they just mean, I'm turning that muscle on more. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know for a long time, well, in our chat beforehand, we spoke about butterfly pull-ups and kipping pull-ups, and when it's appropriate to use both.
So the butterfly kipping pull-ups is, I mean, the more I'm around it, the more I would definitively say this. You should only be doing butterfly kipping pull-ups if you are a genuinely serious competitor for like regionals or beyond. If you want to just be a good local CrossFitter, I'd say get really good at kipping pull-ups, because the butterfly kipping pull-ups, for reasons I can go into later if you want, really come at a high risk for tearing a labrum. And I see labral tears with every single week. I see a CrossFitter that's torn their shoulder doing that. For a competitive athlete, like I've gotten to work with a bunch of CrossFit Games athletes and regionals athletes, you have no choice. There's no one, to the best of my knowledge, in the last probably 4 or 5 years has gotten to the CrossFit Games or even the regionals for that matter without being pretty proficient with butterflies. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they actually had people at regionals and even at the games that couldn't butterfly yet. I think it started to get big about 2010 maybe. But so that's that. So unless you really are fully dedicated and you are being honest with yourself and you have the genetics to make a regionals, I would just not do them, right? Just, it's fine. Maybe you get third in your class of 6, or whatever. But it's not worth the risk. Now, the other thing, on the other side, you hear traditional strength coaches kind of shit on the idea of a kipping pull-up. And I was like, that's not a real pull-up. Like, all right, well, CrossFitters have, 3 different names for them, strict, kipping, butterfly kipping. So it's not like, even if they say pull-ups, it's not like Chris Spieler. I don't know if you saw this years ago. He put up a video that said, 112 unbroken pull-ups. And so he did this video of just him. I mean, he's obviously moved really well, but he gets 112 unbroken butterfly kipping pull-ups, and everyone else got on the internet was like, that's not a real pull-up, that's not a real pull-up. Well, Chris would never tell you. I mean, I haven't asked him this specifically, but Chris would never tell you, like, that's the same as a strict pull-up. But I'm sure that he can do 50 strict pull-ups unbroken, right?
Yeah.
So what I always say to people is like, okay, they don't like kipping pull-ups. And I said, all right, well, do you do push press or do you do jerks? And they're like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, that's cheating. That's a cheating strict press, right? That's using your body, your legs to generate, movement, in that case, of a barbell as opposed to your torso. So fundamentally, or in principle, a push press is no different than a kipping pull-up. It's just a matter of, like, the standard for pull-ups for some reason is that you have to do it in a full hollow, pausing at the bottom, full hang, all the way up to the top, pause and back down. So kipping pull-ups, I think, are really, really functional. I think they're really, really good. And you can do them in a way that protects the shoulder a lot. And what I would say, so going back to the who should use them and when, a lot of people don't do butterflies because they don't have either the pull-up strength or they don't have the rhythm or the technique to do it. Those people, and like I said, unless you're going to make regionals, probably shouldn't be doing them anyways. Kipping pull-ups are kind of the same way, but it's a little bit easier to learn, right? But when you have an athlete that can do a kipping pull-up and then they learn how to do a butterfly, typically they're done doing kipping pull-ups. If I talk to someone that does only kipping pull-ups, they're still working their strict strength. CrossFit's really good about most CrossFitters are good about trying to improve their strict strength. So you might see someone like a Christy Ermo who is a games athlete but still works on strict. But a lot of these games athletes, when you talk to them, they never do kipping pull-ups. They'll do butterfly kipping pull-ups or strict, but not the kipping ones. And I would tell you that, most of the year, if you want to preserve shoulder health, even if you're a games athlete, I would say this to Annie Thorsdottir or Sam Briggs in your guys' area, you should be doing the majority of your work as a kipping pull-up. And then as you get close to the season, now you need to sort of ramp up your endurance with the butterfly kipping pull-up. But for most of the year, and even during the competitive season, you want to preserve the shoulder and still work that kipping pull-up so that you're not beating the shoulder up for the actual season.
Okay, so why is the butterfly so harmful for the shoulder?
Okay, so you have a labrum, on the shoulder. The labrum is kind of like a meniscus in the knee in terms of what it's made of. It's like a stiff, rubbery kind of material, and it's wrapped around the shoulder. If I can, I think all my anatomy techs are in office rooms. But anyway, you've got your shoulder, which has got the shoulder blade, and you got your arm bone, your humerus. Now, it's connected to the clavicle and all this other crap, but we won't talk about that right now. The shoulder blade has what's called the glenoid, and that's just it's more like a disc, like a T, what do you call it? A saucer.
Okay.
It's more like a saucer. So the joint is technically a ball and socket, but a socket kind of implies that it's in there pretty well, like the hip. It's more like a ball and saucer.
Yes.
So it's this teeny little saucer thing and this gigantic ball that sits on this saucer. So it's not stable. That's why you have this gigantic range of motion. The labrum itself is wrapped around the edge of that saucer, and it helps deepen the socket, and it gives passive stability to control forward, backwards, up and down motion of the arm bone on the shoulder blade. So it's really important for passive stability. You also have this tendon attached to the top of the labrum that is actually your biceps tendon. And the biceps tendon goes into the biceps and is very, very important for shoulder stability. So it adds a lot of compressive force, bringing the arm bone into the scapula so that you can keep that shoulder in place. Okay, you follow me?
Yep.
When you go into severe external rotation, which when you're coming down, you're up here like this and you're dropping back down, you're externally rotating as you drop back down. So that's the motion. You're going to drive up, you're coming down like this, external rotation, and now in this end range external rotation position, you're going to eccentrically activate the biceps, which pulls on that biceps tendon and starts to peel the labrum off the shoulder, okay? It's the same mechanism that baseball pitchers get, right? It's a peeling mechanism. I don't know if you can see me, but in baseball, when you come back like this and they start to turn, there's an eccentric load on the biceps and external rotation of the shoulder. That motion twists the biceps tendon and peels it off the labrum.
Sounds nice.
Sounds nice, right? So in baseball, it's a 5-ounce ball, right? In CrossFit, it's your torso. So even though the velocity is not the same as you get in baseball, the actual load you're putting on that biceps is severe. So if you don't have really, really good scapular stability and control, then you're going to be cranking on that labrum and that biceps a lot. The other thing is what I call the swing orbit, which is if you looked from the side, you might see the rig here. The orbit is more kind of up and down for the butterfly. Mm-hmm. Whereas for a kipping, you go up, down and forwards, up, down and forwards. It's more like an L. So the direction that your torso's moving, your center of mass is moving at the bottom there is almost perfectly vertical, and it's a quick turnaround. And we've all seen this. You get somebody that comes up there, and maybe they do 5 pull-ups, but then by the end, instead of having good eccentric control that can slow the torso down and then come back up, they're just bouncing in the bottom. Well, what they're bouncing on is the glenohumeral joint, is the rotator cuff. So you can tear a labrum with that. You can tear a rotator cuff with that. And a lot of times it's not like you jump up there and you do 2 reps and then you're like, oh, man, I just blew my shoulder out. It's just your shoulder just keeps getting stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. It takes longer to warm up. And then eventually if you tear a labrum, typically what happens is you will notice that right shoulder, let's say I tore my right labrum. Every time I go to the gym, my right shoulder will be stiffer and need more mobility work than my left, because once you compromise the labrum, you've compromised the passive structures that contribute to stability. So now you have to over-depend on the active structures, so the rotator cuff. And so now that rotator cuff gets really stiff because the passive stability is limited.
Okay. Nice.
I know that might be a little bit too much anatomy.
No, that's great. The more detail, the better. That made so much sense. So much sense. And hopefully a few people were listening to that and they just touched on it and it's like, oh, geez.
Yeah, so if you go back to a kipping pull-up, whether you're Rich Froning or Sam Briggs, or you're just getting into CrossFit and trying to make regionals, instead of the orbit being down like this, you're actually going to come up here, and then you preload your pecs and your lats, which are super, super strong muscles that can help control the elevation of the scapula. So scapular motions here. You have elevation and depression, protraction and retraction. And then, of course, tilting and rotating, but we don't talk about that. So when you are coming down in a butterfly kipping pull-up, you have your body weight pulling you into elevation. So you need your scapular depressors to be very active to slow that motion down so you're not just bouncing on the rotator cuff at the bottom. The main muscles that do that are the lat, the lower trap, and the pectoralis major. Okay? The trap only attaches to the shoulder blade, so it can really only help the scapula movement. Okay? But the lats and the pec are very, very powerful that I call long compressors of the glenohumeral joint. So the rotator cuff is short, right? It goes from the shoulder blade onto that arm bone. That's it. The lat and the pec are very, very big, very powerful. They actually attach farther down the arm on this, it doesn't matter, but farther down the arm. And what they can do is they can actually grab that humerus and keep it pulled into the shoulder so that you don't overload the rotator cuff and the shoulder capsule. When you're doing like a bunches, you start getting tired, the lats and the pecs get tired, and now that shoulder starts coming out a little bit more, and now the rotator cuff has to work harder and harder and harder to stabilize. That's where it starts to bark up, and then your shoulders get really just gooky and achy. The nice thing about a kipping pull-up is when you're coming through a butterfly and you're sort of here, it's a very, very short period of time where you can actually activate those eccentric controllers of the scapula. In a kipping, you actually have pre-activated them here. You're up, and then as you, if you're gonna cycle through them, you can't just drop straight down. You actually have to push back a little bit to get the swing. So that motion of pushing back turns on your pecs and your lats, and now you've preloaded those guys that are going to keep the shoulder protected. So as you drop down, now you have those super powerful scapular depressors controlling that motion. The other thing is that you can just slide right into a forward motion there as opposed to just dropping and trying to go back up. So between pre-activation of the lat and the pec and getting that motion to go forwards, sort of transferring any of that vertical force into horizontal force, it takes a ton of load off the shoulder.
Nice. Perfectly said, dude. Perfectly said.
Mechanic to shoulder injury, yeah.
And I think we should probably touch on, because we alluded to it or kind of touched around the edge of it as well. Let's go into a bit more detail about what's happening catching a snatch in either a dump forward position or an externally rotated position.
Okay. So typically, the ideal position to catch a snatch is the shoulder blade is going to be down and out. That activates your lower scapular stabilizers. So that's your lower trap and your serratus anterior and even the rhomboids. All those muscles attached to the trunk. When you push up like this, which is what's taught by a lot of Olympic coaches, a lot of CrossFit coaches. I don't know if CrossFit corporate still teaches that, but they
HQ have stopped now.
Okay, cool.
They don't say anything to the other, like to alternative, but they don't say shrug now.
All right, well that's fantastic. I've been screaming about that for 5 years now, but so good. So they're not teaching anymore, but they used to teach push up against the bar, and that uses your upper traps and your levator scapula. Well, those muscles attach to your neck. So number one, I get a lot of neck injuries from snatch, right? Or a lot of neck injuries from handstand push-ups, from jerks. And it's because the athletes are trained to do this. Now you try to turn your head if you're in the middle of one of those motions, and then boom, you aggravate one of the discs in your neck. What we want is to use these very, very well-anchored muscles, the rhomboids, lower trap, or actually just the whole, the middle and lower trap, and then also the serratus. They're going to work together to anchor that scapula down. Once they're there, now we have to think about the actual orientation of the glenoid. So that is the direction it's facing. If you have it in the right position, it's facing lateral, a little bit superior, and a little bit anterior. right? And in that position now, we want to externally rotate. So that is the crease of the elbow pointing up and in, or the elbow itself pointing down and out. And that's going to activate a lot of the lower fixators of the scap. So that'll turn on. If you actually just do it right now if you want. Take your hand, put your left hand underneath your shoulder blade. No, like right in the shoulder blade. Yes. Now, internally rotate your arm, and you feel that you can feel your ribs. Now, poke on your ribs to where it doesn't feel very good, and now externally rotate it and feel how that muscle turns on. Mm-hmm. So that muscle in there is your serratus anterior. When you internally rotate it, you inhibit the most important muscle for scapular stability. When you externally rotate it, you actually activate it. So when we're catching here, not only does that neurologically make the shoulder blade unstable, but it also negatively affects the position the scapula is facing, right? So your shoulder blade is attached to your clavicle. And also you have a muscle in the front called your pec minor. When you push your arms up all the way towards the ceiling, because there's a rigid connection between the sternum, the clavicle, and the shoulder blade, as you elevate your shoulders, it literally pulls the shoulder blade forwards and down. So that tilts it forwards. And now you're putting the shoulder, when you catch the snatch, you're receiving it in end range external rotation of here to here. And that pinches on the shoulder more. We want to be able to catch that bar in mid-range so that the shoulder has movement tolerances so that it doesn't get a torn labrum or a torn rotator cuff. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, where do the pecs come into that stability option as well? Because obviously that's a more internal position.
So if you're here, the pec in this position can't really help you because it's an internal rotator and a horizontal adductor from that. So the pec would pull you here. It would pull the shoulder blades down. So if you're holding there, I can see it contributing a little bit to holding that. And it has to be active a little bit to balance against the dorsal muscles. But the pec can't really do a whole lot in that position because it would literally pull you out of position. You should, if it's externally rotated correctly, you're lining the arm bone up with the scapula, and now the load goes straight into the scapula, bone on bone, without any shearing, right? So think about shearing. It's called translatory shear. But when you think of shear, think of sliding in this case, right? So we don't want the arm bone to slide forwards in the glenoid. That's a bad motion. It injures the labrum, it injures the rotator cuff, and might even hurt the cartilage in the shoulder. If you have the shoulder blade lined up so that scapula is depressed, and then you have the arm bone is externally rotated, now you get proper alignment of the arm, of the shoulder, so more of the load goes straight through the bone as opposed to into the labrum, into the rotator cuff.
Okay. Makes sense. And just to finish up, actually,
I need more pictures and stuff.
Yeah, I know. I can see you desperate for slides and anatomy diagrams.
Right. Next time we do this, I'll set it up near. I got dry erase boards that I can.
Oh, that sounds great. And then force people to watch the video as well. That'll be perfect.
Right.
I know you're coming up super short on time. Well, you've got 2.5 minutes left. So let's finish this off with where can people find out a bit more about you and your work, and maybe sign up to some of the stuff you offer.
So the easiest place, I have a website called athlete-enhancement.com. And that's where a lot of the content that I have. I just put up an article. I think I'll publish it later today, put it up on the website. But any article that I publish, I'll put up on there. So there's a PDF link to it. I've got videos on there, and then there's also a list of seminars that I'm either hosting or that I'm teaching. So any seminar that has open registration, I don't put up the private stuff, but is on there. So if you wanted to see a weightlifting course, or like I was telling you before, I have courses for just CrossFit coaches that goes over a lot of the anatomy and mechanics of the shoulder, of the low back, of the hip, so that they can train their athletes in a way that's not necessarily going to hurt them, but it also would help them perform better too. Instagram is Dr. Richard Ulm, so DrRichardUlm. There's Dr. Richard Ulm on Facebook as well. that's probably just all the easiest ways to do that.
Sweet. Excellent, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And I can feel around 2 or 3 coming up as well.
Cool. That sounds great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Mindset RX, actually not the Mindset RX series this week, of the Alpha Movement Podcast. Remember to check out Intensity Tolerance 101, my entirely free 5-day training course on discovering what's holding you back from pushing as hard as you can. You can do this by heading to the Facebook page, watch it there, give us a like, share it if you enjoy the show. So that's facebook.com/alphamoveofficial. Also, make sure you leave a 5-star review and head to iTunes. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know what you think of the guests, favorite episodes, or just shoot me a message and let me know. It helps my ego grow. And of course, if you're interested and in the UK, you can head to mindsetrx.squarespace.com/seminars, and you will find a link there listing all the seminars I'm doing throughout the UK this year. We've definitely got one more in the Netherlands coming up, and next month is the start of the planning for the world tour, which is very exciting. Anyway, I shall see you next week. Actually, next week's an awesome episode with Kenny Kane that I've just recorded. So I'll see you next week with Kenny Kane for another episode of the Mindset RX series of the Alpha Movement Podcast.